What's going on, guys? We have the NBA betting market video for January the 18th. We're gonna start off with a game that's already started. It's actually in the final minute of play. Knicks are up 5 in this one. Fat guy, 4,577 bets. The Orlando Magic taking on the New York Knicks. Knicks opened as 1-point underdogs at home. But they were bet down or bet up, however you want to look at it, to 2.5-point underdogs at home. 50% of bettors on the Knicks, only 22% of the money though, so that's 78% of the money, helping move the line in favor of the Magic.
I mean, that makes sense. It looks to me like they took exposure on the Knicks, and sounding by the score, it perhaps is paying off here, because I mean, a Magic win and a Magic cover. Magic win by 3 or more is not a good result here, considering the discrepancy in money on both the money line and the spread. And the money line, it's okay if they're a favorite, but if it's okay if they have a little bit more money on it, it's actually good, right? But not as much as they have. Like, there's a little bit of exposure on this money line, and there is, I would say, major exposure on this spread market. So looks like Knicks would have, looks like the books were pulling for the Knicks. Let's put it that way.
And then the OU for this game, it opened at 208. It was bet down to 205.5 with juice on the under at minus 109. 66% of bettors were on the over, but 65% of the money was on the under.
Yeah, well, look what it did to the line, right? This is 4,577 bets. We've been doing these videos a while. We haven't seen a market with this much volume since I can remember. So that 65% carries a lot of weight, I would imagine, and pushes a lot of threshold. Perhaps it's not, a full 2.5 points here because of the juice shift of minus 105 to minus 109, but it is significant 2 points. Yeah, it does make sense. It's a lateral move here for the OU.
And then let's take a look at the Timberwolves-Hawks game, which is going to be starting in about 5 minutes. So we actually get a fairly good look at how this market is going to look towards closing. 1,588 bets so far. The Hawks opened as 8-point favorites. They've been bet down to 7-point favorites, despite receiving 55% of bets and 75% of the money. And conversely, on the money line, minus 316 to minus 285 for the Hawks, 61% of bets, 77% of the money, which is actually pretty even on the money line, but there is a discrepancy against the spread, and the money is definitely not lining up with how that spread line has moved.
There's exposure on the Timberwolves. So, I mean, if you followed the same proviso or same criteria to bet the previous game, the Timberwolves would be your play. Because the books, I mean, it looks to be a reverse line movement. You have an overwhelming demand on the Hawks, you lower the price. You could argue that the juice makes it negligible, which, again, we have to learn what the value of a point is, because minus 8 and minus 102, how much different is it than minus 7, minus 109? Very interesting to put, because I mean 7, perhaps plus 7 minus 101, considering the win rates between minus 108 on at that 8 number, could be almost advantageous to the Timberwolves. Either way, I feel like they're taking a small bit of exposure on the Minnesota Timberwolves. So obviously a Timberwolves victory would be the best result, it looks like, for the books.
So those two markets are fairly similar as far as the Magic Knicks and the Timberwolves Hawks, but I just want to highlight two things that are different. In the T-Wolves game, there's a reverse line movement. So even though more money's come in on the Hawks, the line has moved in favor of the Timberwolves, whereas in the Magic, more money was put on the Magic and the line moved in favor of the Magic. The other thing, too, is that Fat Guy and I like to talk about the volume of bets. So 4,577 bets is a lot more than 1,588 bets. So theoretically, we don't have any proof to back this up, but theoretically, if there is more bets on a game, the books do take more exposure, because you have a feeling that over the long term, if you were to average it out, the more bets on a game, the more money would be on that game.
Yes, it's a pretty reasonable assumption.
On to the OU for this game. Open 228.5, bet up to 229. 62% of bettors, 57% of the money help push that line up half a point, even though the juice is favoring the under at minus 108.
Well, that's the other thing, too. Like, look at the flip-flop in juice. It was even at 105 on both sides at 228.5. At 229, though, it is incentivizing the over despite receiving more of the money. But that perhaps maybe this is just a smokescreen lateral line. I mean, again, you have to know what is the value of a half point between 220.5 and 229 in this scenario. Is it worth 3 points of juice? Is it worth more? I don't know. So again, this is a one of those things where it's a possibility that it's a lateral line movement. It's a possibility that it's a that it's nothing. It's a possibility. It's just you know what I mean. That it's a possibility it's just moving with the money. It's a possibility that this is just a change in the numbers that means the exact same probability wise.
On to the 3 p.m. Eastern time games. So these games start in half an hour. We'll start off with the Pistons Heat, 718 bets. The Heat opened as 5.5 point favorites. They were bet up to 6.5 point favorites. Currently, 58% of bettors and 80% of the money has helped push that line up 1 point. Interesting to note, though, on the money line, the Heat also moved up from minus 222 to minus 255. They have received 57% of bets, but you'll notice right here that the Pistons have 88% of the money.
Wow.
As fairly big underdogs on the money line.
Yeah, reasonable underdogs. It does seem almost balanced, though, does it not, Big Rye? Like, the spread probably has a lot more money on it than the money line. Is that possibility? Because there is a shift, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying to make it congruent?
Yeah, wherever the line moves is typically where that money comes in heavier. And we've noticed that most of the time, whatever money is favoring the spread is where that line moves. The other thing I will say is this is one of those Vegas fiddles where if the Heat win by 1 to 5 points, the books are going to win on both sides. So there's they'll
free roll, as they call.
Yeah, like the worst case scenario is that the Pistons money line hits, but because the money is probably very similar, even though the percentages are not, the total money is probably pretty similar if the Heat win or
we'll make it back on the spread. They might even make money in that scenario, Big Rye.
Yeah, that's true.
It's good to be a bookie.
Yeah. And then on to the OU for this game. Open 218.5, bet down to 217. 218.5, the under was minus 114. 217, the over minus 113. 78% of bets on the over. And money pretty much split 50-50.
Is this even a movement, Big Rye? That's 17 points of juice.
I highly doubt it. It's just one of those things where sometimes it feels like they just move the number to encourage people to bet. But yeah, it's for in the grand scheme of things, if you had to put a percentage, it looks like maybe like 0.2, 0.3% difference. Even if that, it might not be that much of a gap between 218 under 218.5 minus 114 and over 217 minus 113.
You know what it probably is, like a grocery store. It's probably like doing a like buy three get one free, and then 7 for X amount of dollars. Like it's just moving around the advertising. It feels like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Just because maybe because there's price stagnation, and that's also another economic term where they're pretty much just jostling the prices around so that it can spur an action. Again, these are all theories, but that doesn't seem right. They're dropping 1.5 points, but then the juice goes, I don't know, plus 103. Very interesting stuff. Most interesting O-line movement I can think of that probably means nothing.
On to the next game. This also starts in about half an hour from this recording. 1,248 bets on the Spurs Trailblazers game. The Blazers open as 1 point favorites at home, but the Spurs are currently 1.5 point favorites on the road, with the juice helping push the Spurs even further. This line could sit at Spurs -2 very shortly. 52% of bettors are on the Spurs. 67% of the money has helped push that line in favor of the Spurs. And conversely, on the money line, Spurs opened as a pick'em. They're now -126, 29% of bettors, but 57% of the money is congruent with that -126 line.
Yeah, the money line market seems to be pretty close to balanced, I would assume. Whereas the ATS, they're probably got a little bit of exposure I would imagine when you add it all up on the Spurs, but probably not too much. Is it time to buy back on the Blazers would be the question, more or less, because clearly the Spurs positions have already been maxed out. Interesting game considering how tight it is, but pretty reasonable in there is. So perhaps the book is taking a small amount of exposure on the Blazers, but this market also hasn't fully matured, so you can't say that for sure until closing.
And then the OU opened at 226. It's bet up half a point to 226.5 with also heavy juice on the over. So we might see this one hit 227 at some point. 57% of bettors on the over. However, 67% of the money is on the under, despite this line getting pushed up half a point plus juice.
Wow. So, and this could be a big movement here. Like that juice number, because it's 8 points, right? Like, that could even be a true, like, from a 107 to a 107, or sorry, as far as the over goes, from a 103 to a 103, that could be a 227.5, perhaps even, right? So this is a reverse line movement. It looks like, Big Rye. You have strong demand on the under, and then you incentivize the price by a half point and 8 points of juice. Interesting stuff.
On to the Suns-Grizzlies game. This one's a 5 p.m. Eastern time start. 1,134 bets placed so far on this game. The Suns taking on the Grizzlies. Suns opened as 3-point favorites on the road. They've been bet up to 5-point favorites on the road, despite 55% of bets and 51% of the money. And let's take a look at the money line. Open minus 149 for the Suns. Bet up to minus 196. 48% of bettors and 53% of the money is on the Suns. So interesting to see that the money is split so evenly. But who knows? This line might have moved 2 hours ago, and then a bunch of bets might have came in on the Grizzlies, and this is just what equilibrium is.
Absolutely. There could be an injury too or something, because that 2 points doesn't look completely natural from this outset. Interesting on that money line, though. It looks like a Grizzlies victory wouldn't be that good for them. Considering at 175 is the payout, half the money. So imagine you take $1,000 on both games. If the Suns win at minus 200, you're going to have to pay $500 on 1,000. Whereas the Grizzlies, if they win, you're going to have to pay out $1,750. So, I mean, that would be a net loss of $750, considering the amount of money that you'd receive on the Saints. So that is interesting of note. So perhaps minor exposure on the Grizzlies. But who knows? Like, this is the funny thing, though. The money line could be such a smaller market that the against the spread juice could cover that. So that's the thing when you don't know the handle. You know what I mean? It's very interesting stuff.
And then the OU for this game, it makes me think there is some sort of injury or some sort of player news to move this line so much. Because the spread, money line, and OU all changed pretty drastically. And the OU opened at 224. It's been bet down to 218.5, with juice still pushing that under down even lower, possibly what this could get to 218. 98% of the money, however, has been on the over, which is interesting to note.
Very interesting, because they would have got a bum number, considering, like, it's most likely most of this money is on a bum number. Because 224 to 218.5 with 8 points of juice, shifting. Very interesting stuff, because realistically this number could be 216, right? I mean, that's a possibility here, considering the juice shift, because it's not incentivizing you to take the under, so it could shift even further. This true number could be 216 at minus 106 to keep it lateral between the 224 minus 106. So I would imagine, like Big Rye had mentioned, this has something to do with injury. But something of note, because, I mean, realistically, the over is starting to look attractive when you pull down the number that far, considering the likelihood of games finishing in that 220 realm.
And it's so interesting, because why move that line down so much if 98% of the money is already on the over? So it's a very, very confusing one that has such a huge shift on the line, and also they're taking so much exposure on the over already, which is very it makes me think that there's other things at play other than just bettors and how
one to
the
look
market
out
is being
for.
set. Up next, we have the Mavs Raptors, 605 bets for the 7:30 p.m. Eastern time start. Raptors open as 4-point favorites. They've been bet up to 5-point favorites, but despite only receiving 16% of the money against the spread. And this line movement might be because the money line, and it opened at minus 184 for the Raps, bet up to minus 196, but 96% of the money is on the Raptors money line. So the Raptors money line makes sense. The Mavericks against the spread does not make sense. So this is one of those rare examples where maybe there is more money placed on the Raptors money line than anything else.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. This is one definitely to put a star next to because, I would imagine that pros, and some Joes alike, like the Raptors money line market instead of the Raptors spread market, which is interesting. So that makes me think there's some sort of incongruency where you're making a few extra percentage points. But that's something to be reviewed further because, like I said, the most important thing to know is what is the value of a point. You know what I mean? Or a series of points. It doesn't mean a point literal. It's a, one of those philosophical sports gambling questions. What's the value of a point? So this might have something to do with an incongruency in the market between the the spread line and the money line.
And then we have some reverse line movement on the OU, albeit just very, very slightly. 219 up to 219.5 with 61% of the money on the under. So interesting to note that the half point plus the juice has moved towards the over, whereas 61% of the money is on the under.
That's the most striking thing for me in the reverse line movement is like, it's kind of like it feels like a carnival game, a reverse line movement. It's when they have more money on one side and then they make incentivized to buy that again. So it's kind of like what am I missing? Is it too good to be true? Because now for me, because I always think of juice big time, I think of win rate, right? So you go from 51.2% break even win rate at minus 105 to 219.5. So I'm getting an extra half point, and now the break even win rate is 49.5%. Like I don't even have to be right 50% of the time to break even on that wager. So like why are they really incentivizing? Whereas conversely, to take the over, they're putting up roadblocks. The win rate is what, 52.6 roughly. So I mean, I don't know. Interesting stuff.
On to the Bucs Nets game, which I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to watch tonight with the roster changes with the Nets. 983 bets so far. The Bucs open as 2.5-point favorites on the road. They've been bet up to 3-point favorites on the road. 44% of bettors and 70% of the money on the Bucs, helping push that line up. And the money line is telling us the same story. Minus 143 to minus 145. 58% of bettors and 70% of the money is on the Bucs. The one thing I will go back though, because against the spread on the juice here, the Bucs are minus 110 to minus 105, which isn't that much of a move when you compare it to the money line going from minus 143 to minus 145. So this is the kind of market where it's interesting to see 983 bets. There's still going to be more bets coming in, but not all, 70% of the early money against the spread and the money line has been on the Bucs. However, this line here and this line here has barely moved off of what these lines are telling us. So very interesting to note there that since there is so much money coming in on the Bucs early, but not enough to move the line that much in favor of the Bucs.
Well, maybe they're bracing themselves for perhaps an influx of public money on the Nets. I mean, this is going to be the biggest bet game of the day, I would imagine, considering the prolific scoring nature of both teams. So, I mean, it is worthy of note. Like Big Ryan mentioned, it's not the biggest movement at all. It looks like 1/45 of price change in favor of the Bucs, despite receiving 70% of the money. Maybe there is value on this Nets team. Who knows? But again, that's purely speculation. I just want to see how this market matures more than actually betting this game.
The game opened at 240 on the OU. It's been bet down to 239.5 with juice on the over. So this might not be that much of a line movement at all. 41% of bets on the over. However, 70% of the money has been placed on the under.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And let's Big Rye's got a good point here. Like maybe there is this is $983. Or 983 volume is standard with the amount of money being bet, but maybe they're expecting a very large handle on this game. So the threshold has changed a little bit, consider because they have data. Because think about it, every primetime game on holidays, they're gonna know like what to expect realistically. Like they take all the bets, they harvest data. That's how they beat us. Is they harvest data, right? Like that's one of their that's at least a good book is. I mean, that's if you're a price maker. If you're a price taker, you just follow what everyone else does and hope that you come out on the other end more or less, right? A price maker writes tickets and they collect that data and then they use that data to their benefit because they have like this is only stuff we can glean, right? Like we have to make inferences where they actually know the numbers and they can project like the amount of money they're getting in, so then they can use that as pricing guidelines. So the threshold to move a line is probably a little bit bigger on this game than it would be for a smaller market game, i.e. the Mavericks Raptors game running concurrently at the same time, because chances are TVs are going to be affixed to this Bucs Nets game, and so will the betting volume and perhaps the betting dollars.
And then on to the Rockets Bulls, 643 bets so far. The Rockets open as 2.5-point favorites at -101. They currently sit at -2, -112, so not much of a line move at all, to be honest.
No.
Maybe even a little bit against them, despite the line moving in their favor. 79% of bettors, though, are on the Rockets. So interesting or 58% of bettors, 79% of the money is on the Rocket. Interesting to note, considering that the line has technically moved against them, but who knows? We don't know the exact amount of the difference between a -2.5, -101, and -2, -112 off the top of our heads, at least for NBA.
Yeah, the Maurice Richard team, the Houston Rockets. It looks like it is a line move. If you use the money line as a benchmark, considering they became, I guess it is a reverse move, like you had mentioned, because it became -130, -133. They became bigger favorites. So perhaps here we go. That half point of -2.5 to -2 isn't. That half point isn't worth the 11 points of juice, 11 1/12. So perhaps there we go. That's where we're already starting to piece it together. So that is because like I said, what is the value of a point? That's what a lot of these videos are trying to deduce, and it does kind of make sense, I would say. I guess it's a reverse line movement, Big Rye, but it's 643 bets, and there's going to be so many more, I would imagine. Although not that the Bulls and the Rockets, I imagine, are two heralded teams, but there should be more money. So maybe this is a micro reverse line movement. Could we give it that designation?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it's one of those Vegas middles again. Since the Rockets against the spread, if they win by 3 or more, 79% of the money on the Rockets. Whereas on the flip side, Bulls at +120, 52% of the money. There's a little bit more exposure on the Bulls money line. So the best result for the books is going to be for the Rockets to win by 1 or possibly
Rockets
2,
by 1,
depending on when all that money came in against the spread on the Rockets.
Because the 2 might get a push, because the 2 would push the perhaps most of the spread dollars and win some of it as well at the -2.5 designation, whereas it would capture more dollars on the money line market, considering the even though the Bulls, I mean, they have 52% of the money, but that's not really what we're looking at. It's the 121 price. The payout is a little bit stiffer.
And then the OU for this game open at 226.5, bet down to 226, even though there still is heavy juice on the over. So similar to the market against the spread, this OU hasn't really changed despite the half-point line move. 58% of bettors on the over, 55% of the money is on the over.
Yeah, they're incentivizing the under at 226. I mean, we're losing half point, but we're gaining 5 points of juice, right? So, I mean, I guess this is probably just a price exchange, more or less,
On to the Warriors-Lakers. Lakers open as 9-point favorites. Bet down to 8.5, 54% of bettors on the Lakers. However, 67% of the money is on the Warriors against the spread. And then conversely, the money line, Lakers -419 is what they opened at. They're currently sitting at -397. So both the spread and the money line markets have moved in favor of the Warriors. And the Warriors have only received 11% of the money on the money line. So interesting to note there. So more money coming in on Lakers money line and a lot more money coming in on the Warriors against the spread.
I would imagine this has something to do with parlay tickets, the Lakers, and perhaps too, like how some of this early money can be is they parlay yesterday and then they add the Lakers today because Lakers are probably the biggest favorite of the day, I would imagine. So that kind of makes sense. Like say you bet, you bet both games yesterday, and then you parlayed both those games with the Lakers because they were the biggest favorite. That seems like a very square maneuver, so I can understand that. But does this provide value now on the Warriors because of the spread market? That's the part that's interesting. Does that, because the squarest of money is adding parlay tickets and the teams selected on the money line of the parlay tickets. It really is. So the amount of action they created in reverse supersedes the commission you would pay on taking the other side, which makes the Warriors an interesting conversation piece in regards to wagering. So the 8.5 points, because they can't have too big a disparity between money line and against the spread, so they have to do this weird balancing act. So sometimes they offer value on the other team considering all the square money on the Lakers. The problem is Joe money, like i.e. a parlay ticket, is like could be $2. So you're going to need a lot of $2 tickets to add up to just one sharp bet, right? So that's why this weird balancing act happens, and it's not exactly easy to deduce considering we don't have the handle numbers. So chances are there is value on the Warriors, but that's pure speculation because I don't understand where you could get 89% of this money and 66% of bettors on the Lakers anywhere else.
And then the OU market, it opened at 223.5. It's been bet up 3 points to 226.5. There is heavy juice on the under, though, at minus 108, currently at 226.5.
Heavy-ish.
Yeah, and 52% of bettors, 51% of the money is on the under.
So it's not like a complete 3-point move, but these are pretty significant finishing numbers. So maybe it's a 2.5-point move. Very interesting considering that the money discrepancy. So perhaps maybe that this maybe under money came in after when they moved the line. We'd have to look through that one to see how it shifted as it went along. But interesting stuff to see how it moved. At least 2.5 true points, if not closer to 3.
That is it for the NBA betting market for January the 18th, 2021. Good luck to you guys on all your NBA wagers